Hi, students. It's Mrs. Smith. I'm going to be trying to read to you from Squirrels and Other Fur Bears. And this is in particular for the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. And this is written by John Burroughs. We're into the porcupine chapter. So let's find out what Mr. Burroughs thinks about a porcupine. Among our wild animals, there are 3 that are slow-moving, dull-witted, and almost fearless: the skunk, the possum, and the porcupine. The 2 latter, that means 2 at the end of the list, the possum and the porcupine, seem to be increasing in most parts of the country. The possum is becoming quite common in the valley of the Hudson, and the porcupine is frequently met with within parts of the country where it was rarely or never seen 40 years ago. Now, I looked up Valley of the Hudson, and that is along the Hudson River. And I wanted to show you where that's located a little bit. Anyway, I have a map in the back of my planning journal. And we live in Pennsylvania, and above us is the state of New York. And this Hudson River Valley travels like north-south up here on the side of New York. And it encompasses the Catskill Mountains and the Adirondacks. So there's some rural country around that Hudson Valley that he is writing about. When the boys of late fall now go cooning, where I used to go cooning in my youth, what would cooning be? What do you think? Well, if you said raccoon hunting, you would be right. The dogs often run when they're out cooning and trying to chase a coon up a tree. They run on a porcupine. And they drive him up a tree, and thus the sport is interrupted. Sometimes the dog comes to them with his mouth stuck full of quills and is then compelled to submit to the painful operation of having them withdrawn. Really hurts to have them pulled out. I believe there's a little barb on the end of the quill, so going in is easier than coming out. A sportsman relates that he once came upon a dead porcupine and a dead bald eagle lying upon the ground within a few yards of each other. The eagle had partly torn the porcupine to pieces, but in attacking it with its beak, it had driven numerous spines of the animal into its throat, and from their effect had apparently died as soon as its victim. Oh my. Quills through the throat. Not good. The quill of a porcupine is like a bad habit. If it once gets hold, it constantly works deeper and deeper. Though the quill has no power of motion in itself, it is the live, active flesh of its victim that draws it in by means of the barbed point. Well, if I understand that right, once the quill gets into your flesh, as you move, it moves deeper. One day, my boy and I encountered a porcupine on the top of one of the Catskills, and we had a little circus with him. We wanted to wake him up and make him show a little excitement, if possible. Without violence or injury to him, we succeeded to the extent of making his eyes fairly stand out from his head. But quicken his motion he would not, probably could not. What astonished and alarmed him seemed to be that his quills had no effect upon his enemies. They laughed at his weapons. He stuck his head under a rock and left his back and tail exposed. This is the porcupine's favorite position of defense. Now, come if you dare, he seems to say. Touch his tail, and like a trap, it springs up and strikes your hand full of little quills. The tail is the active weapon of defense. With this, the animal strikes. It is the outpost that delivers its fire before the citadel is reached. It is doubtless this fact that has given rise to the popular notion that the porcupine can shoot its quills, which of course it cannot do. But it can swing its tail. With a rotten stick, we sprang the animal's tail again and again, till its supply of quills began to run low, and the creature grew uneasy. "What does this mean?" he seemed to say, his excitement rising, his shield upon his back, too. We trifled with, and when we finally drew him forth with a forked stick, his eyes were ready to burst from his head. Oh my. The only time I've ever seen an animal's eyes popping out of its head was my rabbit, Mr. B. I had a graduation party. Well, our family threw a graduation party for one of my children, and we had a karaoke machine in the yard, and the music was loud, and my rabbit was on the porch. And when I walked up onto the porch, I noticed his eyes were bulging out of his head. And I had read that if that happens to a rabbit, they're very scared. And rabbits can die from shock. So I covered him up and took his cage into the house for the time of the party. I think I saved his life. He really was upset. So I'm imagining a porcupine with its eyes bulging out because his quills are not working. In what a peevish, injured tone the creature did complain of our unfair tactics. He protested and whimpered and scolded like some infirm old man tormented by boys. His game, after we led him forth, was to keep himself as much as possible in the shape of a ball, but with 2 sticks and a cord, we finally threw him over on his back and exposed his quillless and vulnerable underside, when he fairly surrendered and seemed to say, "Now you may do with me as you like." Then we laughed in his face and went our way. So once the porcupine was unrolled onto its back, it kind of gave up. Before we had reached our camp, I was suddenly seized with a strange, acute pain in one of my feet. It seemed as if a large nerve was being roughly sawed into. I could not take another step. Sitting down and removing my shoe and stocking, I searched for the cause of the paralyzing pain. The foot was free from mark or injury, but what was that little thorn or fang of thistle doing on the ankle? I pulled it out and found it to be one of the lesser quills of the porcupine. By some means, during our circus, the quill had dropped into my stocking. The thing had taken, and the porcupine had his revenge for all the indignities we had put upon him. I was well punished. The nerve which the quill struck had unpleasant memories for many, many months afterward. So that tiny, it looked like a little thorn, it was so little, that went into his ankle, worked its way, hit a nerve, and that bothered him for months. I'm never playing with a porcupine. When you come suddenly upon the porcupine in his native haunts, he draws his head back and down, puts up his shield, trails his broad tail, and waddles slowly away. His shield is the sheaf of larger quills upon his back, which he opens and spreads out in a circular form so that the whole body is quite hidden beneath it. The porcupine's great chisel-like teeth, which are quite as formidable as those of a woodchuck, he does not appear to use at all in his defense, but relies entirely upon his quills, and when those fail him, he is done for. I once passed a summer night alone upon the highest peak of the Catskills, Slide Mountain. I soon found there were numerous porcupines that desired to keep me company. The news of my arrival in the afternoon seemed to have spread rapidly among them. Then they probably had scented me. A porcupine has very good sense of smell and very good hearing. After resting a while, I set out to look up the spring, and I met a porcupine on his way toward my camp. He turned out in the grass, and then I paused, came back into the path, and passed directly over my feet. He evidently felt that he had as good a right to the road as I had. He had traveled it many times before me. When I charged upon him with a stick in my hand, he slowly climbed a small balsam fir. So a balsam fir, would that be a deciduous tree like a maple? Or did you think a pine tree? Balsam fir. Well, if you said pine, you're correct. And how about that? Porcupines climb trees. I really never thought about it. I always see pictures of them waddling along, defending themselves against some attacker, but they climb trees. I soon found the place of the spring, and having dredged it and cleaned it, I sat down upon a rock and waited for the water slowly to seep in. This must be a special way that he drinks from a stream. My backpacking boys use filters that you buy, and boil the water and those type of things. But it looks like he sort of filters it his own way. Presently, I heard something in the near bushes, and in a moment, a large porcupine came into view. I thought that he, too, was looking for water, but no, he was evidently on his way to my camp. He also had heard the latest rumor on the mountaintop. It was highly amusing to watch his movements. He came teetering along in the most aimless, idiotic way. Now he drifted a little to the right. Then he drifted a little to the left. No great hurry, apparently. His blunt nose seemed vaguely to be feeling the air. He fumbled over the ground. Tossed about by loose boulders and little hillocks, his eyes wandered stupidly about. I was in plain view within 4 or 5 yards of him, but he heeded me not. Then he turned back a few paces, but some slight obstacle in his way caused him to change his mind. One thought of a sleepwalker. Uncertainty was stamped upon every gesture and movement, yet he was really drifting towards camp. After a while, he struck the well-defined trail, and his gray, shapeless body slowly disappeared up the slope. In 5 or 6 minutes, I overtook him shuffling along within sight of the big rock upon which rested my blanket and lunch. As I came up to him, he depressed his tail, put up his shield, and slowly pushed off into the wild grass. While I was at lunch, I heard a sound. And there he was, looking at me from the path a few feet away. An uninvited guest, I said, but come on. He hesitated and turned aside into the bracken, and he would wait till I had finished and gone to sleep, or had moved off. I wonder, with his keen sense of smell, if he was smelling the lunch, or the sleeping bag, or what it was that he was investigating. How much less wit have some animals? Animals like the porcupine, the possum, and the skunk, and the turtle, that nature is armed against all foes. Then the animals have no such ready-made defenses and are preyed upon by a multitude of enemies. The price paid for being shielded against all danger, for never feeling fear or anxiety, is stupidity. Do you think the porcupine is stupid? Or just seems that way? He doesn't have to worry about being attacked. Not as much as other creatures. If the porcupine were as vulnerable to its enemies as, say, a woodchuck, it would probably soon come to be as alert and swift of foot as the marmot. Now, here is Mr. Burroughs' sketch of a porcupine. And there's the tail that he can whip up. And there are different types of porcupines. There's porcupines that live in America, and then there's some that live in Europe and Asia and Africa, and they look different. Some of them have really long tails, and some of them look just their quills are really, really long. The ones in Africa live more on the ground. Our North American ones like to climb trees. Now let's see. I only have 2 more pages. Let's see if we can make it through porcupine. For an hour or more that afternoon, on the mountaintop, my attention was attracted by a peculiar, continuous sound that seemed to come from far away to the east. I queried with myself, is it the sound of some workmen in a distant valley, hidden by mountains? Or is its source near by me on the mountainside? I could not determine. It was not a hammering or a grating or the filing of a saw, though it suggested such sounds. It had a vague, distant, ventriloquial character. Now, that ventriloquial is a big word. See if you can see it underlined here. Right here, ventriloquial. And you know how ventriloquist is, it makes the sound of the lips don't move. So it sounds like the voice is coming from the puppet. So that's what that word means. A sound that is coming from not a mouth. In the solitude of the mountaintop, there was something welcome and pleasing in it. Finally, I set out to try to solve the mystery. I had not gone 50 yards from camp when I knew I was near the source of the sound. Presently, I saw a porcupine on a log, and as I approached, the sound ceased, and the animal moved away. A curious kind of chant he made, or a note of wonder and surprise at my presence on the mountain, or was he calling together the clan for a midnight raid upon my camp? I made my bed that night of ferns and balsam boughs under an overhanging rock. What did he make his bed out of? Ferns, balsam boughs, that's a fir tree, evergreen, and he was under an overhanging rock. Where the storm that swept across the mountain just after dark could not reach me. I lay down, rolled in my blankets, with a long staff by my side, in anticipation of visits from the porcupines. Wow. In the middle of the night, I was awakened, and looking out of my den, saw a porcupine outlined against the starlit sky. I made a thrust at him with my staff, when with a grunt or grumble he disappeared. A little later, I was awakened again by the same animal or another, which I repelled as before. At intervals during the rest of the night, they visited me in this way. My sleep was by short stages from one porcupine to another. Who would think about that? That you'd have to sleep with a staff. These animals are great gnawers. Gnawers. Gnaw, to gnaw. Do you know what that means, to gnaw on something? Yeah, to chew with those big teeth he has. They seem to be especially fond of gnawing any tool or object that has been touched or used by human hands. They would probably have gnawed my shoes or lunch basket or staff had I lain still. A settler at the foot of the mountain told me they used to prove very annoying to him by getting into his cellar or woodshed at night and indulging their ruling passion by chewing upon his tool handles or pails or harness. That would be for like a horse. Kick one of them outdoors, he said, and in half an hour he is back again. In winter, they usually live in trees, gnawing the bark and feeding upon the inner layer. I have seen large hemlocks quite denuded and killed in this way. And I wanted you to think about the word denuded. Here at the bottom of the page, denuded and killed. So if the porcupine is chewing on a tree and taking off its bark and chewing on its inner cambium, and if he chews enough of it, the tree will die. Yeah. So, yeah. But denuding would be to be stripping it, to strip the bark of the tree, to strip the tree bare. You could also say something like, the wind denuded the trees of their leaves. Okay? All right, we finished it. We finished the porcupine chapter. God bless you. Stay away. Don't touch. Bye.